From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I definitely vote to Mr. Mir Hossein Mousavi because he's going to come and change this horrible situation, this horrible condition, because we are in a situation that we are going to lose everything.
Millions of Iranians go to the polls today to vote in the presidential election. A record turnout is expected. We'll take a look at the leading candidates. Then the AMA announces its opposition to a public health plan. President Obama will address them on Monday.
The single biggest problem we have in terms of the debt and the deficit is healthcare.
We'll look at the AMA's history of opposition to health care reform. Then the New England Journal of Medicine reveals the health and life insurance industries hold invested billions of dollars in tobacco stocks. Then we'll speak with a nanny-turned-organizer about a domestic workers' Bill of Rights. And today marks the 80th anniversary of Anne Frank's birth. How a 13-year-old girl became the defining voice of the Holocaust. We'll play an excerpt of children reading her diary. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Obama administration says it's scrapping plans to let foreign prisoners cleared for release from Guantanamo live in the United States. The White House had already announced its opposition to admitting a group of 17 Chinese Uyghur prisoners, even though they were no longer designated enemy combatants and ordered immediately freed. Administration officials cited congressional opposition to the Uyghurs' release and arguing they stood no chance in convincing lawmakers to accept other freed prisoners. The news comes as 4 of the Uyghur prisoners have now been released to Bermuda, where they'll live as foreign guest workers. The U.S. is still in talks to send the remaining 13 to the Pacific archipelago of Palau. 2 other Guantanamo prisoners were also released Thursday and sent to their home countries of Iraq and Chad. The Chadian, Mohammed El-Garani, was the youngest Guantanamo prisoner on record, having been arrested in Pakistan at the age of 14. Congressional Democrats, meanwhile, have reached an agreement on a war funding bill that would authorize the transfer of Guantanamo prisoners to stand trial in the United States. The measure does not include language allowing indefinite detention, as President Obama has initially proposed. The White House also dropped a request for a provision imposing a congressional ban on the release of photos showing the abuse of prisoners at U.S. jails in Iraq and Afghanistan. President Obama said he'll continue to seek the photos' censorship through an appeal to the Supreme Court. The war funding bill includes more than $90 billion for the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan and is expected to be voted on next week. In a letter to other House members who've previously opposed war funding, Congress members Lynn Woolsey of California and Dennis Kucinich of Ohio urged them to retain, quote, steadfast opposition to the new bill. Speaking on the House floor, Kucinich said the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan is based on aggression and lies.
New administration and the same old war, and expansion of the war in Afghanistan. We cannot afford these wars spiritually. They are wars of aggression and they're based on lies. We cannot afford these wars financially. They add trillions to our national debt and destroy our domestic agenda. We cannot afford the human cost of these wars, the loss of lives of our beloved troops, and the deaths of innocent civilians in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan.
The Senate has approved a measure that would strengthen government regulation over the tobacco industry. On Thursday, senators voted 79-17 to give the Food and Drug Administration new authority in overseeing the manufacture and marketing of tobacco. The FDA would be able to ban the most harmful of the thousands of chemicals used in cigarettes and reduce the amount of nicotine. Tobacco companies would also be forced to disclose the ingredients in their products. The House passed a similar measure last month. A longtime cigarette smoker himself, President Obama has vowed to sign the legislation into law. President Obama was in Green Bay, Wisconsin Thursday to promote his push for health care reform. Speaking at a town hall-style event, Obama rejected criticism of his calls for creating a government-run public insurance program that would compete with private insurers.
To those who criticize our efforts, I ask them, what's the alternative? What else do we say to all the families who spend more on health care than on housing or on food? What do we tell those businesses that are choosing between closing their doors and letting their workers go?
Obama's comments were aimed at critics who've opposed any type of public health plan. Private insurers have opposed a government-run program out of fear they'd be unable to compete with its cheaper costs. Obama did not, however, address his progressive critics who advocate the creation of a single-payer system that would eliminate for-profit insurance companies entirely. As Obama promoted his version of a public health insurance program, a key Senate Democrat said he would oppose any form of public health care. Max Baucus, the Senate Finance Committee chair leading congressional efforts on health care reform, said he would propose a plan based on creating member-based insurance cooperatives not run by the government. Baucus explicitly ruled out using the word public, saying, quote, "It's not going to be public. We won't call it public, but it will be tough enough to keep insurance companies' feet to the fire." The white supremacist James von Brunn has been charged with murder for Wednesday's shooting death of a security guard at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. The security guard, Stephen Johns, was 39 years old. On Thursday, John's mother, Jacqueline Carter, spoke of her son's life.
He's just a beautiful person. He liked his job, and he worked a lot. And it would be just like him to try to protect people, from harm.
Von Brunn remains in critical condition from wounds sustained when other security guards returned fire. Meanwhile, Thursday, the FBI acknowledged it had been, quote, aware of Von Brunn's hateful writings about religious and ethnic minorities, but that it never launched a criminal probe. The World Health Organization has declared the outbreak of the swine flu a global pandemic. On Thursday, the WHO raised its pandemic alert level to 6, its highest level. Health officials say the alert level means the swine flu has spread to 2 world regions and doesn't signify a likely increase in deaths or serious cases. The top U.S. military commander in the Middle East says violence in Afghanistan has reached its highest level since the U.S.-led invasion of 2001. General David Petraeus said the attacks hit a more than 7-year high last week. Addressing the public outrage in Afghanistan over a score of deadly U.S. attacks, Petraeus said, quote, "This is the graveyard of empires. It is a place that has never taken kindly to would-be conquerors." In Iran, a record turnout is expected today for a presidential election between incumbent Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and 3 other opposition candidates. Ahmadinejad is facing a stiff challenge from Mir Hossein Mousavi, an architect and artist who served as prime minister of Iran from 81 to 89. We'll have more on the Iranian elections right after headlines. Former President Jimmy Carter is renewing criticism of the U.S.-led boycott of the elected Hamas government. Speaking on a visit to Syria, Carter said the U.S. and Israel should drop their refusal to deal with a Palestinian unity government that includes Hamas. Carter also called for a prisoner exchange that would see the return of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit in Gaza for some of the more than 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails.
I don't believe there's any possibility to have peace between Palestinians and Israel, unless Hamas is involved directly in harmony with Fatah. My hope is that we could soon see some agreement between Hamas and Israel with the release of Shalit and an equivalent release of prisoners that Israel is holding of Palestinians.
In Sudan, the Sudanese government has authorized several aid groups to return to Darfur. Sudan expelled the groups in March after the International Criminal Court charged President Omar Hassan al-Bashir with committing war crimes in Darfur. UN Emergency Relief Coordinator John Holmes said the groups have been readmitted on the condition they change their names and logos. Holmes also said the aid groups will return to humanitarian crisis that worsened during their absence.
However effective the efforts of the government, United Nations and remaining NGOs have been in preventing a further immediate crisis, they have not yet replaced and cannot easily or rapidly replace the capacity and skills lost. Current levels of assistance in some areas remain well below the necessary standards to which we subscribe. And as we enter the hunger gap and rainy season, the needs and gaps will only be further